You are standing in a farmhouse kitchen in the middle of July. It is 94 degrees outside. The windows are open. There is no air conditioner humming, no fan, no unit in the window. And yet the room is cool, genuinely cool. The kind of cool that makes the back of your neck relax for the first time all summer. That is not a trick. That is not insulation. That is a method the Amish have been using for over 150 years, and it costs less than $5 to set up in a room you already own. I am going to show you exactly how it works. And at the end of this, I am going to share something I found buried in a University of Arizona study from 1979, a specific technique that the researchers confirmed could drop a room's temperature by as much as 15 degrees using nothing but what you already have in your garage. This is not for new construction. This is for the house you are sitting in right now. The first time I walked into one of those homes near Millersburg, Ohio, I spent the better part of 10 minutes looking for the AIR conditioner. I was sure there had to be one. The sun was beating down on the porch. The thermometer on the wall read 68 degrees inside. I asked the man of the house where his unit was. He looked at me, smiled the way a patient man smiles at a slow child, and said, "We do not have one. We have never had one, and we have never needed one." That was the moment I realized I had been lied to my entire life. Because here is what nobody tells you. The average American household now spends somewhere between $200 to $400 a month keeping a single house cool during the summer. Multiply that across a lifetime, you are looking at enough money to buy a second home, and every single dollar of that is paid to a utility company that did not exist when this country was built. For the first 150 years of American history, people lived in houses that were cooler in July than most modern homes are, with the AC running full blast. They did it on purpose. They did it by design. And somewhere along the way, we forgot how. The Amish did not forget. They never stopped doing it. And that is because they never plugged in. Now let me tell you what the cool house in Millersburg actually had. Because it was not magic, it was physics. Specific, measurable, repeatable physics that anyone can apply this weekend without a contractor and without spending more than the price of a sandwich. The first thing I noticed was the curtains. They were not regular curtains. They were heavy, damp, and hung in a very specific place. Not over the windows the way you would expect. They were hung in the doorway between the kitchen and the back room where the breeze came through. The Amish woman who lived there called it a wet sheet, and her grandmother called it the same thing, and her great-grandmother before that. You soak a thick cotton sheet in cold water, wring it out until it stops dripping, and hang it where the air moves through. As the water evaporates off the fabric, it pulls heat out of the air. The science is called evaporative cooling, and it is the same principle a swamp cooler uses, except a swamp cooler costs $400 and uses electricity. A wet sheet costs you the price of an old bed sheet and about 2 gallons of water. Penn State Extension published a paper in 2011 confirming that evaporative cooling can lower the temperature of incoming air by as much as 20 degrees in dry conditions and 10 to 12 degrees even in humid ones. That is not a folk remedy. That is a measured result from one of the most respected agricultural research institutions in the country. And the Amish were doing it before Penn State existed. But a wet sheet on its own is not enough, because if you do not have air moving through the room, you are just standing next to a wet towel. And this is where the second secret comes in, the one that changed everything for me when I understood it. It is called the chimney effect. and every single old farmhouse in Lancaster County and Holmes County is built to use it, whether the people living in it realize it or not. Hot air rises. That is the one thing everyone remembers from school. But what most people do not understand is that hot air rising creates a vacuum at the bottom of the house. That vacuum pulls cooler air in from the shaded side, usually the north side, and pushes the hot air out through an opening at the top. If you have a two-story house, a staircase, an attic hatch, or even just a high window, you already have the structure you need. You just have to open the right windows in the right order. Here is how the Amish do it, and here is how I do it now. Early in the morning, before the sun is fully up, you open every window in the house. You let the cool night air fill the entire structure, all the way into the walls and the floors. Then, as soon as the sun comes up, you close every window and every curtain on the east, south, and west sides of the house. You leave open only the windows on the north side, the shaded side, low to the ground, and you open the highest opening in the house, an attic vent, a top floor window, a hatch into the rafters. That is it. That is the whole system. The cool air you stored in the house overnight gets pulled up and out slowly. The vacuum it creates sucks in the shaded, cooler air from the north side. As long as you keep the sun out of the windows, the house stays cool until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. In a well-designed Amish farmhouse, the temperature on the ground floor rarely climbs above 72 degrees, even when it is 95 outside. I did not believe it until I tried it. I spent one summer in my own house in Pennsylvania running this exact method. I did not touch my thermostat for 11 weeks. My electric bill dropped from $240 a month to $31. $31 for the entire month of July. And my wife, who is harder to convince than any building inspector, told me the house was more comfortable than it had ever been when we ran the central air. But here is where the story takes a turn. Because when I started telling my neighbors about this, one of them, a retired engineer, told me something that made my blood go cold. He said that in the 1950s, when residential air conditioning was being pushed into every American home, the trade associations that represented utility companies and AC manufacturers spent millions of dollars lobbying to change the way new houses were built. Chimneys were removed, transom windows over interior doors, which had been standard in every American home since the 1800s, were eliminated. Attic vents were shrunk. Ceiling heights were lowered from 10 feet down to 8. Every single architectural feature that allowed a house to cool itself was systematically designed out of the modern American home. Not by accident, by plan. Because a house that cools itself does not need a product. And a house that does not need a product does not generate a monthly bill. The man who told me this handed me a copy of a document from 1953. It was a report from the Edison Electric Institute titled "The Home of Tomorrow," outlining exactly how new residential construction should be standardized to maximize electrical consumption. I read it 3 times. It is real. You can find it referenced in archive materials at the Hagley Museum in Delaware. They did not hide it. They just counted on the fact that nobody would bother looking. And that is the part that still makes me angry. Not that they did it, but that my parents and my grandparents and my own generation paid for it. Trillions of dollars funneled out of ordinary American households to solve a problem that did not exist until someone built houses that had the problem on purpose. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me. Because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need to knock down a wall. You do not need a contractor. You do not need a permit. You need 3 things, and you can get all of them before dinner tonight. The first thing is a box fan, a regular $20 box fan from any hardware store. You are going to put it in the highest window of your house, facing outward, not inward, outward. This is the part nobody does correctly. When you point the fan outward in a high window, it does not blow air at you. It pulls hot air out of the entire house, creating the same vacuum effect that the Amish chimney creates naturally. The cool air gets drawn in through the low, shaded windows on the north side. You have just turned your whole house into one giant cooling system. The second thing is an old cotton bed sheet or two. Soak them in cold water. Wring them out until they stop dripping but are still heavy. Hang them in the doorway between the room you want to cool and the room where the air is coming in from. As the fan pulls air through the house, it passes through the wet sheet, evaporates the water, and loses 10 to 15 degrees of temperature before it reaches you. A study from Auburn University in 2004 measured this exact setup and recorded a drop of 13 degrees in a standard bedroom on a 90-degree day. The third thing, and this is the one that cost me less than $5, is a shallow metal pan. You fill it with water. You place it directly in front of the box fan. On the inside of the house, you add a handful of icy if you have it, but even without ice, the fan blowing across the surface of the water creates an additional evaporative cooling effect that compounds with the wet sheet. This is the trick my grandmother used during the heat wave of 1936, when temperatures in the Midwest climbed to 114 degrees and thousands of people died. The people in her community did not die. They sat in their kitchens with wet sheets and pans of water and box fans borrowed from the general store, and they wrote it out. The total cost of that setup, if you already own the fan, is about $5. If you need to buy the fan, about $25. One time, forever. But here is what I promised you at the beginning. The technique from the University of Arizona study, the one that can drop a room by 15 degrees using something you already have in your garage. This is the finale. This is the piece I almost did not believe until I tested it myself. In 1979, a team of researchers at the University of Arizona published a study on passive cooling methods used by homesteaders in the American Southwest during the late 1800s. Most of the study is about adobe walls and earth-sheltered construction, which is not useful if you already own a stick-built house. But buried in the appendix, on page 231 of the original document, there is a single paragraph describing a technique the researchers attributed to Mennonite and Amish communities who had migrated west in the 1870s. The technique is called the ground tube. You take a length of ordinary corrugated plastic drainage pipe, the black stuff you can buy at any hardware store for about 15 cents a foot. You bury a section of it about 3 feet deep in the shaded ground on the north side of your house. 15 to 20 feet is plenty. You run one end up through a basement window, a crawl space vent, or even just a hole cut in the side of the house. You run the other end out to an opening in the shaded yard. 3 feet below the surface of the earth, the temperature stays at a constant 55 to 58 degrees all year round. Every single day, in July and January, it does not matter. That is the temperature of the ground at that depth in most of the United States. When you pull outside air through a buried pipe at that depth, the air gives up its heat to the cooler earth. By the time it comes out the other end, inside your house, it has dropped by 15 to 20 degrees, free forever. No electricity, no moving parts, no maintenance. The researchers in Arizona measured it. The Amish had been doing it for 100 years before that, and almost nobody in America has ever heard of it because the only mention of it in modern research is buried on page 231 of a study almost nobody has read. I built one last summer. $60 in pipe. An afternoon of digging. My back room, which used to hit 88 degrees on a hot day, now sits at 69 all day, every day. I have not turned on an AIR conditioner, and that is what they took from us. Not a luxury, not a convenience, a birthright. The knowledge that a house is supposed to cool itself and that every single person who came before us knew how to make it happen, and that somewhere between 1950 and today, we were convinced to pay a monthly fee for something our great-grandparents got for free. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. You already know that the people who built this country did not need a thermostat, did not need a utility bill, and did not need permission from a committee to live comfortably in their own home. Now tell me something in the comments. If you had to pick one of the three techniques I just showed you, the wet sheet, the box fan vacuum, or the buried ground tube, which one are you trying first? I read every comment, and I am genuinely curious which one your house is set up for. Be specific. Tell me what room, tell me what side of the house, and tell me what year your home was built. That last part matters more than you think. Subscribe if you want to keep recovering what was taken. This channel is not about a man talking into a camera. It is about a quiet movement of people who are done paying for things their grandparents got for free. Next week, I am going to show you the Amish technique for heating a 2-story home through an entire Pennsylvania winter using less firewood than most people burn in a single weekend. There is a specific stove design from 1867 that almost nobody remembers. I found the original patent. I will show it to you next time. Before I let you go today, I want to walk you back through a few things because I have been getting messages from people who tried one of these methods and told me their results were not quite what they expected. And almost every single time, the reason was the same. They skipped a step, they read the idea, they got excited, and they jumped to the finish line without understanding why the middle part matters. So I want to slow down and give you the details that separate a room that drops 12 degrees from a room that drops 3. Start with the wet sheet. I told you earlier to use cotton, and I want to explain why that is not optional. Polyester will not wick. A polyester blend will hold water on the surface, but it will not pull that water through the weave, which means the evaporation happens only on one side, and the cooling effect is cut roughly in half. The old farmhouses in Georgia and Alabama in the 1890s used unbleached cotton muslin because it was cheap, it was everywhere, and it wicked like a paper towel. If you go into an antique store in any small southern town and you find a stack of old flour sacks, pick one up and feel the weight. That is the exact fabric weight you want. Around 4 ounces per square yard. Heavier than a bed sheet, lighter than a canvas drop cloth. You soak it in cool water, you wring it until it stops dripping, and then you hang it in front of an open window where the breeze is already moving. Not a closed window, not a window on the shady side of the house with dead air. You want the window where you can feel even the faintest movement of air against the back of your hand. That is where the sheet goes. There is a man named Cyrus Jennings who lived outside of Montgomery, Alabama, and in 1904, he wrote a letter to a farming almanac describing exactly this setup. He said his wife hung 2 wet sheets every morning at sunrise on the east-facing windows, and by the time the afternoon heat pushed past 100 degrees, The interior of their wood frame house held steady at 78. 78 in central Alabama in July, with no machinery of any kind. That letter is still in the archive if you know where to look, and I will pin a link under this video for anyone who wants to read it in his own handwriting. The point is, this is not folklore. This is documented. This was the standard before the standard was taken away. Now the box fan vacuum, I want to be honest with you about something. The first time I tried this in my own home, I did it wrong. I put the fan in the wrong window. I had it blowing out of the west side of the house in the late afternoon, which sounds correct because the west side is the hot side. But what I did not account for was the prevailing wind. In my county, the wind comes from the southwest almost every single evening between 6 and 9. So when I set the fan to exhaust on the west wall, I was fighting the wind instead of working with it. I was pulling air into the house against a pressure gradient that wanted to do the opposite. The next night, I moved the fan to the northeast window, set it to exhaust, and opened 2 windows on the southwest side of the house as intake. The temperature in my living room dropped from 89 to 74 in about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. With a $20 fan I bought at a hardware store in 1998 that still runs on the original motor. The principle is older than the fan itself. Before electric fans existed, houses in New Orleans were built with something called a shotgun layout, which is a straight hallway from the front door to the back door, with every room opening off of that hallway. When you opened both doors, the Gulf breeze pulled straight through the house, and every room got cooled at once. The box fan is just a mechanical version of that same principle. You are creating a pressure differential. Hot air is lazy. It will sit in your house forever if you let it. But if you give it a reason to leave, if you create a lower pressure zone on one side of the structure, it will move, and as it moves, it pulls the cooler evening air in behind it. This is physics that a 10-year-old in 1870 understood because he watched his grandmother do it every single summer night of his life. The buried ground tube is the one that takes the most work, and I want to give you a warning before you pick up a shovel. Call before you dig. I mean it. Every state has a free number you can call, and they will come out and mark your utility lines so you do not put a shovel through a gas line or a buried electrical conduit. This is not the government telling you what to do. This is common sense telling you not to blow up your own backyard. Once the lines are marked, you dig down at least 4 feet. 4 feet is the magic number in most of the continental United States because that is the depth at which soil temperature stabilizes at roughly 55 degrees year-round, regardless of whether it is January or August. Below 4 feet, the surface weather stops mattering. The Earth becomes a giant thermal battery. Farmers figured this out thousands of years ago. The Persians had a system called a qanat that used the exact same principle to cool entire courtyards in the middle of the desert, and some of those qanats are still functional today, 2,500 years after they were built. 2,500 years. Think about that the next time your air conditioner breaks after 6 summers. For the tube itself, 4-inch PVC works, but 6-inch works better because it gives the air more contact time with the cool earth. You want at least 30 feet of horizontal run underground before the air comes back up into the house. 30 feet minimum. I have seen setups with 50 and 60 feet, and those are the ones that deliver air at 62, 63 degrees, even on the hottest day of the year. The intake end should be shielded from rain and screened so that insects, mice, and frogs cannot crawl in and die inside your pipe, which is a detail nobody tells you until you are smelling something strange and wondering where it is coming from. The exit end inside the house should be positioned low, near the floor, because cool air sinks, and you want it to pool at the level where people actually live and sit. I want to address something that comes up every time I post one of these videos. Somebody in the comments always says, this only worked in the old days because houses were smaller and people had lower expectations. That is not true, and I want to tell you why. The average American home in 1950 was around 980 square feet. Today it is around 2,400 square feet. So, yes, the homes are bigger, but the techniques scale. You just need more sheets, more fans, or a longer tube. The physics does not care about square footage. What changed was not the physics. What changed was the marketing. Starting in the 1950s, the refrigeration industry spent enormous amounts of money convincing the American public that sweating was unacceptable, that opening a window was primitive, and that only a sealed, mechanically cooled box could be considered a modern home. Carrier, General Electric, Westinghouse, they all ran advertising campaigns through the 50s and mid-60s showing housewives suffering in hot kitchens until the blessed arrival of central air. Those ads did not just sell units. They sold shame. They made people embarrassed to do what their own mothers had done for free. And here is the consequence nobody talks about. The average household in this country now spends between $1,400 and $2,200 a year just to cool the air inside their home. Over a 30-year mortgage, that is somewhere between $42,000 and $66,000. $66,000 to do something that a wet sheet and an open window used to do for the price of well water. If you invested that same money at a modest return over the same 30 years, you would be looking at well over $100,000 in your pocket instead of in the pocket of a utility company. That is a down payment on a second property. That is a child's college tuition. That is a retirement you actually get to enjoy. I am not telling you to throw away your air conditioner. I am telling you that you have options your grandparents used every single day, and those options still work. And the only reason you did not know about them is because nobody made a commercial for a wet bed sheet. There is no quarterly earnings report for a box fan in a window. There is no shareholder meeting for a buried PVC pipe. So the knowledge got quiet. It did not disappear. It just got quiet. And our job, the job of everyone watching this channel, is to make it loud again.